Martin King III had that video we were just privileged to see made some 2 or 3 years ago, and so glad he shared it with us to begin our evening together. Good evening, friends, and welcome to this joint celebration of Black History Month and Breakthrough Atlanta. We're delighted and honored that you're here with us this evening. Breakthrough Atlanta, as most of you know, was founded in 1996, and it currently serves over 500 students from across Atlanta. Thanks to the generosity of hundreds of people across Atlanta, and a number of you are here tonight, Breakthrough Atlanta dramatically broadens and deepens the educational horizons of our students and gives aspiring teachers invaluable experience. Before I introduce tonight's program, I want to thank a few of the people who've made tonight possible. My sincere thanks to Elise Hawkins, Lovett's Director of Multicultural Programs, and to Monica Rogers, Executive Director of Breakthrough Atlanta. These two colleagues have led efforts to create tonight's program. Several members of our Breakthrough Atlanta board are here this evening, and we thank that wonderful group under Penny Allen's terrific leadership for their stewardship and generosity. I also want to thank our Director of Strategic Communications, Courtney Fowler, and her fabulous team for helping us effectively get the word out about tonight's program. And thanks also to Drs. Savon and Jeff Hines, longtime supporters of Lovett, Breakthrough Atlanta, and the Atlanta Youth Academy, which generously hosts our second Breakthrough Atlanta site during the summer. Savon and Jeff have helped to make possible Unity and Heritage 16, Can You See Me Now?, an exploration of African American identity. This fabulous art exhibit is in our Galleria upstairs, and following tonight's program, I hope all of you will join us there in the Galleria for a reception in celebration of this evening, and especially in honor of our three panelists. And thank you to all of our friends here tonight from Atlanta Youth Academy, such an amazing community in its own right. Peter Rooney is here, the president of that very special community. The theme of tonight's program is building Dr. King's beloved community. Dr. King spoke frequently and eloquently about the beloved community. In 1957, early in the civil rights movement, he said this about the transcendent purposes of the beloved community, quote, "The end of the beloved community is reconciliation. The end is redemption." Dr. King went on to say that the spirit which characterizes the beloved community transforms enemies into friends. The type of love that Dr. King envisioned in the beloved community is this. In his words, it is not eros, a sort of aesthetic or romantic love, not philia, a sort of reciprocal love between personal friends, but it is agape, which is understanding and goodwill for all men. Agape is an overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. It is the love of God working in the lives of men. This is a love that may well be the salvation of our civilization, close quote. Dr. King's soaring rhetoric continues to lift us today. So the question remains, how do we respond to Dr. King's challenge to constantly work toward the beloved community? We're blessed this evening with a panel of extraordinary servant leaders to help us get our minds and hearts around that question, that challenge. Let me briefly introduce these special people, and then we shall get on with our discussion. More complete biographical profiles are in your programs. Valerie Jackson is the wife of the late Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson, and her daughters Alexandra and Valerie Amanda are both graduates of Lovett. Mrs. Jackson is a graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University and the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where she earned her MBA in 1973 and where she was among a handful of African American women to do so. Mrs. Jackson is a former advertising executive, and she currently hosts a radio show on WABE, the NPR station here in Atlanta. Her show is called Valerie Jackson in Conversation, and in her show, she interviews leaders in politics, culture, art, and the media from across the world and the country. Her interviewees have included Sidney Poitier, Deepak Chopra, Hillary Clinton, Jimmy Carter, and Wynton Marsalis. While her husband served as mayor, Mrs. Jackson worked to strengthen Atlanta's ongoing economic development efforts and was a vital part of the work in bringing to Atlanta the 1988 Democratic National Convention and the 1996 Summer Olympics. Her work through the Maynard Jackson Youth Foundation and the Alliance for New Humanity speaks volumes about her deep care for our community and for the underserved. Please join me in welcoming Valerie Jackson.
George Turner just completed an amazing career of 36 years with the Atlanta Police Department, serving the last 6.5 years as our police chief. He was educated in the Atlanta public school system and went on to earn his bachelor's degree and Master's of Public Administration degree from St. Leo University and Columbus State University, respectively. Chief Turner enjoys deep and wide-ranging respect among law enforcement professionals in and outside of Atlanta. When he concluded his service as our police chief, he was overseeing more than 2,000 sworn officers, the largest police force in Atlanta's history. While George Turner served as our chief, crime in the city declined by 27% to the lowest level in more than 4 decades. During the highly emotion-laden protests in July 2016, Chief Turner's Atlanta Police Department drew praise from across the country for its tactful, thoughtful, respectful, and professional responses. Chief Turner has been recognized in our state and in our nation for the qualities and integrity of his leadership. He has served as president of the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police and vice president of the Major Cities Chiefs of Police Association. I had the privilege of meeting Chief Turner last March when we participated together at the annual Are You Smarter Than a Kipster? I just said to the chief that I'm hoping tonight will be easier than that was on the two of us, because we both found out we're not smarter than a Kipster. But that was a great program benefiting the 7 KIPP schools here in Atlanta. This is a man who cares deeply about our community. Please join me in welcoming Chief George Turner to Lovett. Like his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, Martin Luther King III attended Morehouse College, receiving his bachelor's degree in political science in 1979. Through the years, Lovett has been blessed to have had several members of the King family visit our school. Martin's mother, Coretta Scott King, addressed our upper school students in 1975. His sister, the late Yolanda King, spoke here in December 1985, just before the first official National Martin Luther King Jr. holiday in January 1986. His sister, Dr. Bernice King, spoke at last year's joint celebration of Black History Month in Breakthrough Atlanta, and his aunt, Christine Ferris, has visited our campus several times. These visits to the Lovett campus by the King family members have been very meaningful to us, and having Martin King III here tonight is especially meaningful. As many of you know, while Lovett has much to be proud of over the years, the mid-1960s and the beginning of school integration were a difficult time in our history. In 1963, Mr. King applied to Lovett and was denied admission. Shortly thereafter, the school's trustees embraced a non-discriminatory admission policy. Our school is more diverse and inclusive than ever, even as we continue to have important work to do and to aspire to in the critically important area of inclusivity. This year's kindergarten class is the most diverse in our school's history, and we're committed to not resting on those laurels and to moving forward and upward as our mission calls us to do. Martin King III has demonstrated time and time again his commitment to our community and certainly to the vision of the beloved community. He's been enormously visible for years and years in his own fight for reconciliation. Across his career of servant leadership, he has led the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the King Center and has served as an election monitor and observer in South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. For his work as an activist and as a spokesperson for social justice, he's received numerous awards and honorary degrees. A year and a half ago, he was awarded the Humanitarian Award by the Montreal Black Film Festival. His father used to talk frequently about the symbolic and soulful power of marching. And certainly his son, Martin Luther King III, walks his talk and demonstrates literally every day his unwavering commitment to the ideals of equal opportunity, justice for all, and the beloved community where all are reconciled with one another. Welcome, Martin, back to Lovett. Glad to have you here. So let's get started. This is really meant to be a conversation. I've had some questions prepared and have shared those with Ms. Jackson and Chief Turner and Mr. King. And we'll start and we'll go for about sort of 45 minutes in that way, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience if that's okay. A general question, I think a natural place to start. What specific pieces of Dr. King's vision have inspired you the most, and why?
I think we should start that question.
That'd be great. That's fine. Great. Martin,
if you don't
yes,
mind,
that'd be great.
because
The question one more time, I apologize. I wasn't.
What specific pieces of your dad's vision have inspired you the most, and why?
Well, first of all, I'd have to say, and let me just first say, I'm honored to have the opportunity to be here this evening. Thank you for inviting me, especially to be with our distinguished panelist that I've known for a number of years. So I would have to say that I look at the leadership that Dad and Vision offered in a number of ways. First of all, it was 1955 when he became somewhat nationally known. When, after Miss Rosa Parks had sat down on a bus on December 1st of 1955, she became the heroine of a major drama, and Dad became the major spokesperson. So he and his team were able to transform the city of Montgomery, because for 385 days, African Americans did not ride the buses of Montgomery. 60% of the ridership. After 381 days, you got a serious deficit. You got to figure out how do we do some deficit reduction. And so, the vision to get people to do this, because no one knew whether or not they would be engaged or not. I mean, they had to organize taxis to take people to work. They had to, some people walked. Some people rode bicycles. I mean, it was phenomenal. So I think the vision started there. Obviously, the height of the vision that we know of would be the I Have a Dream speech. But most people don't realize that Dad had over 1,000 speeches. And I Have a Dream was one of the most powerful ones, but there are many others that our world does not know about that I think would be very prevalent even today as we look at a divided nation and really divided world. Even though the world is smaller in one sense, somehow we've got to find a way to, as a nation, I think we've got to figure out how to forgive on some things. And we've got to figure out how do we move forward and not backward. And it feels like, the tension feels like we are on a road for not necessarily moving forward. And I think that's just because of the whole political dialogue that has taken place. I think we have to find ways to challenge the president and certainly support him on the good things that are done, and things that we disagree with, we have to fight vigorously against. So,
Thank you.
all right. Thank you. I agree with that. I'm sorry if I took over there for a minute. Well, it's just my work. I'm sorry. It's just habit, right? But I wanted to hear what the son of such a visionary would glean from his father's life. And there were many things, many areas of vision that your father demonstrated, not just racial equality, poverty, and education. But I think the one vision, if you will, that stands out or means the most to me is his vision of brotherhood. The fact that we are all brothers and sisters. And as a matter of fact, there's a big discussion today about immigration. And we have to stop, I believe, looking at each other in separate pegs and compartments, and really start thinking of us, as your father indicated, as a community of human beings. Your neighborhood is not just the street that you live on. It's this city, it's the world. But there's something in one of your father's speeches that really struck me about that issue. And if I might share it with you and read it, it goes, "All men are interdependent. Every nation is an heir of a vast treasury of ideas and labor to which both the living and the dead of all nations have contributed. Whether we realize it or not, each of us lives in the red, so to speak. We are everlasting debtors to known and unknown men and women. When we arise in the morning, we go into the bathroom where we reach for a sponge which is provided for us by a Pacific Islander. We reach for the soap that is created for us by a European. We then, at the table, drink our coffee, which is provided for us by a South American, or tea, which is provided by the Chinese, or cocoa by West Africa. Before we leave for our jobs, we have already beholden to more than half of the world. No man is an island.
Thank you, Billy, for a gracious introduction. And it wasn't embarrassing. It was good for a purpose that we were together when we got defeated so miserably on the Kipster's panel. Let me just say this. In the very trying time that we find ourselves in as we struggle with racism and socioeconomic challenges of our time, I think discussions like this really bring me back to the point where I really do believe that it was Dr. King's personal commitment to service that inspires me. And then also just seeking to understand as opposed to be understood. And I think that these kind of discussions are so critical for today. If we are not having those conversations, as we challenge ourselves to be intentional about how we include people in our discussions, how do we move into a place where I think that this audience is a prime example. It's a great example of what Atlanta looks like, diverse, and I think everyone has a voice, and I think that's what really inspired me. One of the things that I was able to do as the police chief is I embraced the demographics of our city, and we included all of those voices to make decisions on what was the direction that we needed to go in and how we ran our department, because it mattered. It mattered what the genders had, the different genders at the table and what they were going to be talking about, the races, and also not just black and white, but all throughout our nation and throughout our city. We have so many voices that if we choose to listen to just the segregated areas that we choose to live in, if we're not intentional about moving outside of those spaces, then we do a disservice to Dr. King's dream of the beloved community.
Thank you, Chief Turner. Thank you. Chief Turner's really anticipated the second question, but I still think it's worth asking. Folks, in the work you have done, that each of you has done professionally and in your many roles as citizens, leaders, mentors, share some of the most inspiring examples of your seeing Dr. King's vision in action, his vision of the beloved community. I think it's important to be reminded not of things that happen in our own community that really manifest that vision.
Well, let me start more globally, because I really think that every social change movement, certainly in the 21st century, was inspired by either Mohandas K. Gandhi and what he did in India, utilizing the philosophy of nonviolence, to what Dad and his team were able to do in the modern era of the civil rights movement. So whether you're talking about the women's movement, whether you're talking about in Tiananmen Square when Chinese were demonstrating, singing "We Shall Overcome," whether you're talking about the Berlin Wall coming down, or whether you're talking about today, the personification of what Black Lives Matter does and how they get pegged by media improperly. There may be individuals who are not personifying what needs to happen, but the organization itself has positive merit. I don't think our nation hears, I think individuals hear, and that's across the board, but I don't think the nation really hears the voice, because everyone knows that every life is important. There's no life that is not minimized. But it feels like to many in the African American community that African American lives don't matter. And so that is really what the part of the call is. But I also think that, there are other organizations. I mean, I can say certainly the gay and lesbian movement derived inspiration, also from the modern civil rights movement, because I think some of the tactics that everyone has used began or were seen by what Dad and his team were able to do in terms of helping to transform this nation so that it has become a very, very powerful nation. Let me add this final dynamic, because one of the things that I think that has not happened is there is a project. This has nothing to do with the question per se, but for those who like to do research, Stanford University is doing a project called the King Paper, has been doing for about 20 years, the King Papers Project. And it is each volume, there are about 8 of them now. There will be 12. Each volume takes about 12, 15 months to do, and they've been working on it, as I say, about 20 years. It is the scholarly works of Martin Luther King Jr. It's mind-boggling to me the amount of scholarship that Dad was able to do himself. And so I think that as he is seen as a human and civil rights and religious leader, ultimately when that project is finished, he also will be seen as a scholar, which I think for those who want to do more research, certainly, as I say, there are about 8 volumes now that are completed. And when you look at the fact that he was on stage from 55 to 68, that's a very, very short period of time, and he was 39 years old. And I'm like, I got to get busy. I'm almost 60. I'm nowhere near what he was able to do in a very compact amount. He and his team, I should say, because he really had a lot of supporters. I don't mean masses of people support. I mean individuals who worked with him, women and men, that brought the change that we see today in our nation and our world.
Which question are we on? I'm sorry. About
In your specific role professionally as a citizen, as a mentor, just those examples of Dr. King's vision in action.
I thought about that question long and hard, really, because once I began to think about it, I realized that before I met my husband, I really had not seen a whole lot of visions of Martin Luther King's, a whole lot of manifestations of his vision. And I say that because at 13, I integrated an all-white high school with my 2 brothers. Every day we were harassed and so forth. So that was a daily fight. Then I wanted a part-time job to help pay, because I'm one of 8 children, the 3rd oldest, a girl, which meant I was the 2nd mom in the house. But I needed a job to help, buy shoes and so forth. So a classmate of mine, a young white girl, because it was an all-white school, but for my family, had talked about how she had just gotten a job at the telephone company, a part-time job. And so I said, oh, great. I said, well, I can do that, because I knew that I was as bright as she was. And so I went down to the telephone company and applied, did the interview and all that and so forth. And then they called me back in a few days and said, well, unfortunately, they didn't have any more positions open. So a few days later, I'm at school, and all of a sudden, another young girl, a friend of the first young girl, comes up and says, guess what? I got a job at the telephone company, too. I said, well, how did that happen? I said, I thought they didn't have one. No, they told me I could have one. So I went home and I told my mother. I said, Mom, do you know that they told me that they didn't have any positions, and yet, another young white student got a job. And I know that I'm as smart as these girls. My mother got on the phone and called the telephone company and gave them what for, as to say, when she got off of that phone, I had a job. Seriously. All right? I didn't want to integrate that all-white high school, but my mother made me. She said, I am not going to send you 18 miles past a perfectly good school so that you can go to a black school. I'm not going to send you 20 miles past a good school just so you can go to a black school. And we were supposed to be going to the black school. That was where we were assigned. So she fought that. And I didn't want to do that, but I had to do it anyway. All right, so moving on. So I got the job as a telephone operator, but then I wanted to get into Wharton, and that was another fight. But fortunately, some people talked to some people, and things worked out. To make a long story short, I had always had to fight to get what I needed. Nobody showed any kind of a Martin Luther King type of vision or help or empathy or sympathy. It was not until I met Maynard Jackson and saw, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, and saw what Martin Luther King's vision really could do and be, because he was a manifestation of it. Fortunately, he asked me to marry him. And that's a whole beautiful story I'll have to write one day. But may I digress just
Yes,
for a moment?
absolutely.
All right. When Maynard was first elected as mayor, Ebony magazine did this big article, youngest American mayor of any major city, this and that, and so forth. And I'm reading the article. I'm not sure if I'm out of Wharton or about to graduate. So I read the article, and I'm halfway through it, and I stop, and I say, daggone it. Now that's the kind of man I want. And I read on, and it said he was married with 3 kids. I said, ugh! I said, but that's all right. I know what I want now. I want me a Maynard Jackson. 5 years later, fast forward, I'm in New York, and I happen to be Roberta Flack was a mutual friend of ours, and she invited me to brunch one day, and Maynard was there, and you know the rest of the story. But I just had to kind of put that in because it's been a very romantic, it was a very romantic, loving marriage. And part of that was also part of your father's vision in terms of family and support and caring for each other and sacrificing for each other. And I saw Maynard do all of that as mayor of Atlanta. He didn't climb no crystal stair, as one young famous poet said. He had to fight. People talked about him being a bull in the china shop. He had to be a bull in the china shop because, they weren't opening the door. But I must say, he might have broken a lot of dishes, but he didn't just sweep them up and throw them out. He put the pieces back together, molded them back together with a little bit of community input and a little bit of this, made up some new dishes from the old ones and brought them back to the table, brought more people to the table, different people to the table because of that made up kind of dinnerware, so to speak. And instead of taking people away from the table, he brought more to the table. He always said, inclusion does not mean that we just include black people. It means that you have to be sure that you don't exclude those who are already included. I'm sorry, y'all have to stop me now, okay? And I'm not sure if I answered the question, but okay. So,
Well, let me just say this. My story is a lot different than yours, Valerie. I grew up in the city of Atlanta. I was born in 1959, born at Grady Hospital. Of course, in the black wing of the hospital at the time.
Right.
And I tell you, Dr. King's vision really has made it possible for me to be in the position that I served in for almost 36 years. Some of the things that took place in our department, and just allow me to just kind of go through this whole litany of things that have happened in the Atlanta Police Department, and I'll finish up by talking about how Dr. King's vision and his work has transpired the department and law enforcement throughout our nation. The first officer in the city of Atlanta was hired in 1853. In 1947, the domination of the Klan in the Atlanta Police Department was abolished. So for 94 years, the Ku Klux Klan really was the dominating power inside the Atlanta Police Department. It wasn't until 1948 that the first black police officer was hired in the city of Atlanta. And it was 8 police officers, and it was very intentional in the leadership of the time chose your grandfather and other clergies and business leaders said that it was very intentional that we included blacks to police in our city. But it wasn't until 1962 that those first black police officers was allowed to arrest white citizens for crimes. And then in 1969, all the barriers between the whites and blacks working in the Atlanta Police Department was brought down. So if you go to our police academy and you look at a pictorial history, there were black police academies and white police academies until 1970, when black police officers and white police officers went to school together, went to the academies together. Then in 1976, there was a hiring freeze because of the opportunities around diversity. And so from 76 to 1982, there was we were driven by the federal government whether and how we to hire and to promote. And then in 1978, we hired our first black police chief, and that was George Napa. Obviously, Eves was the first black law enforcement commander who was the public safety director under Jackson. And I said all that to say that the diversity of our department did not happen overnight. The work, it took discussion, negotiation, and really direct action to make those things happen. And then if we think about the implicit biases that all of us have, and you think about, you mentioned Black Lives Matter. In July of this year, in front of the governor's mansion, with all the attention being around what we were doing and how we would handle that situation. And all over the country, where police officers were in battle with riots against citizens and young people who really was directly involved in action. It really reminded me in my younger time on the police department when the Rodney King riots took place. I was literally on the backside of the Atlanta University campus when your husband, Maynard Jackson, allowed the Morehouse and the Clark Atlanta University campus to really negotiate and talk about what was happening with the Rodney King verdicts. 2 days later, we had tear gas, we had burning of cars, and it was an ugly scene. Now, you fast forward that to July of last year, where we used a tremendous amount of tact as well as restraint. And officers had been on the front line for 3 or 4 days. And I think if you move forward to where we are today, around our nation, we're more concerned about implicit biases, as well as the diversity that we have inside the Atlanta Police Department is a model compared to what you see around the country. And I'm so thankful to have had this opportunity to serve as the police chief, but I tell you, it could not have happened without Dr. King and so many other leaders who really forged the way for the opportunity for us to bring in this diversity, this great opportunity to hear from various different races and sexual orientation, to really talk about what was important and to bring that to bear and to really be part of this beloved community, which is, I think, the Atlanta Police Department is an example for not just the United States, but throughout the world.
May I just comment on something?
Yes,
You said
ma'am.
you mentioned the 8 police officers, the first 8 black police officers, and you said it was intentional and so forth, and it was very deliberate, but it was also an agreement between Hartsfield, Mayor Hartsfield, John Wesley Dobbs, Maynard's grandfather, your father, your Daddy King, and so forth. They had to basically promise, because of this coalition of black and white together, they came to an agreement that we, when I say we, I mean the black community, would provide 10,000 votes to Hartsfield if they could get some black policemen. That's how we got black policemen. It was a trade-off. We had to use our voting power to get those policemen. Just another example of how the bottom line is that you're going to have to learn how to work with each other and barter with respect to the respective powers and possibilities, that we all have. So,
Right.
Okay, sorry about that. I thought that was
Yeah,
important.
yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
In these politically polarizing times, Reverend Martin, you made reference to this a few moments ago, but in these divided times, polarizing times where we sometimes struggle to focus as much on the overall community, on the beloved community, on the common good as we might, what specific thoughts and recommendations would the three of you have for us to help us in tangible ways move more quickly, more effectively toward the beloved community?
Well, I still believe that we've not learned the model of nonviolence, and it still is very prevalent, whether it's domestic or whether it's global. And it would be wonderful if we, as a society, chose to have conflict resolution introduced into our school system, starting in kindergarten, so that by the time kids get to be seniors and get to go to college, if you're still dealing with not just civics and human rights, I mean, there are several things that I think need to happen. But let me say, as it relates to nonviolence, there are 6 steps and the 6 principles that Dad and his team used and employed. The first step is information gathering. Before you can resolve any conflict, you first have to gather all the information. The second step is people have to be personally committed on all sides if you really want resolution. The third step is oh Lord, I'm having a senior moment. I'm not a senior. But the third step, let me see, I may miss one, but I'll come back to it. Oh, here's my lovely wife and daughter. And maybe I could say to
Saved by the
her,
interruption.
honey, I'm missing a step. I need your help. Information gathering, personal commitment, then 3, and 4 is negotiations, but I'm missing 3. No, that's 5, right? Well, anyway, okay.
That's why I write my stuff down.
I apologize. I mean, I know this, I live it, so I'm not sure why I'm missing one step. But the 4th step I know is negotiations, where you sit down. Generally, in the first 4 steps, you can resolve most conflicts, quite frankly. Direct action really is the 5th step. So what we see today often in protest, a lot of protest, is people go from nothing to direct action. It's not that it's bad, it's just that you haven't gone through all the steps. And it's important to have each step, I believe, to create a fulfillment of a sense of what needs to be done. The 5th step is that direct action where you engage sometimes in protest, where you engage sometimes, in Dad's era, it was boycotting. I mean, if we as a nation want to resolve some of these difficult issues that we have, then maybe we ought to stop consuming so much. I mean, we don't have to do anything but identify one corporation, and the corporation will come and fight our battle with us to make sure that equality, justice, righteousness exists for all. If we just decided we're not, I don't want to target anybody. I've been in the headquarters of Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines, and used to be Georgia Pacific, but so many other companies, the Southern Company. But I'm saying there are major companies that we could just target and say, okay, we're not going to buy anything right now until these issues around how people are treated are addressed. And the final step is reconciliation. I still can't remember the third. Education. How can I miss education?
I thought you talked about it, though.
Information,
You mentioned it.
personal commitment, education, educating everybody about the issues. And then the 4th step, negotiations. 5th step, direct action. And 6th step, bringing the community back together, reconciliation. I think my dad and his team, they showed us and did that over and over again. And it's something that I think needs to be taught and trained in our school systems, because our young people need to understand there's an alternative to violence, to resolving problems. I mean, we're constantly inundated with violence. Most of the video games are violence and blowing up and shooting something. Mm-hmm. No wonder we are violent. Right. Our society is constantly programming it. Many of our movies are violent. Our cartoons used to be more violent. Now they're better. So we've got to decide as consumers, well, do we want to be exposed to this? It doesn't mean I'm not suggesting that there should not be free speech, because I'm an avid believer in free speech, but I think that we can decide what we as a society want to do. And I think that as a society becomes more informed, I think we also have to do our own research, because now, I've never heard of fake news or alternative facts. I'm not suggesting it doesn't exist. I mean, that's what they call it, alternative facts. I mean, I don't know when facts began to change. The facts have always been the facts. But today we have a different set of circumstances. So that's why you have to do your own research. You can't just depend on what someone tells you, including understanding that the news is a business. Every last one of them are in business to make money. They're not in business necessarily. Part of what they're supposed to do is inform you, but they're businesses. So, you got to think about that as you do research to determine what is actually all true or what is trying to persuade you one way or the other. So, I mean, we've got a big job in our society, but I really believe if we go back to the fundamentals and basics of teaching and training people how to live together without destroying personal property, and of course, you can't mandate that. We as individual schools can say we want this, but it would be wonderful if our entire society said, okay, we want to have conflict resolution because our young people need an alternative to resolving their conflict without using violence as a means to an end. There's a better way, a higher way. And we as God's highest creation are much better than the behavior we exhibit. I mean, I personally believe human beings are God's highest creation. So, you've never seen a group of donkeys talking about I'm Democrat or Republican or independent. They don't have that ability. You've never seen a group of monkeys talking about Shakespeare and Plato or Euripides or Malcolm X or Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman or Martin Luther King Jr. They don't have that ability. You've never seen, a group of dogs talking about I'm Christian, I'm Muslim, I'm Jewish, I'm Hindu, I'm Buddhist, I'm atheist, I'm agnostic. They don't have that ability. But we as God's highest creation have the ability to think and reason, and yet when we get ready to resolve conflict, we resort to low animal means to do it. We are better than the behavior that we exhibit. We as a nation, we as a city, we as a community, we as a world.
Moi? Okay. I tried to think specifically about things because generalities sometimes just don't help a whole lot. So, and I wrote them down because I have a lot of senior moments, and this way I can get through them quicker without forgetting stuff. Number one, don't bowl alone. About 10 years ago, I interviewed a political scientist named Robert Putnam. He had written a book called Bowling Alone. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. But basically his theory was that this is 10 years ago now, that we were coming into a period of alienation where we were all starting to separate ourselves and isolate ourselves from each other. And he felt that this was part of why our society was starting to break down. And interesting enough, there's an article out recently called Bowling Alone in the White House. I'll let you Google that and read that. But many, many years ago, 50 years ago maybe, your father wrote that very same thing, if I might read. When an individual is no longer a true participant, and he was saying this because things had become automated and people were starting to separate. When an individual is no longer a true participant in society, when he no longer feels a sense of responsibility to his society, the context of democracy is emptied. When culture is degraded and vulgarity enthroned, when the social system does not build security but induces peril, inevitably, the individual is impelled to pull away from a soulless society. This process produces alienation, perhaps the most pervasive and insidious development in contemporary society. That was your father over 50 years ago. And now you've got political scientists writing theories and books about that very issue. So don't bowl alone. Stop separating yourself. I'm guilty of this myself. I withdrew from a lot of clubs and got off some boards because I was just like, that's just too much. And so I have to look back at myself and say, well, why did you pull away? I like to think it's because I should be retiring and I have a right to say no sometimes. But when I really looked at it, I said, why are you pulling away? So we need to ask ourselves that question. And we also need to act on our beliefs. We talk about what we believe in, what we're standing for, what we won't stand for. How do you act on your beliefs? Simple things like, when Alexandra was in the 3rd grade, my youngest, she came home one day and said, Mom, this new girl is in school, and her name is Teresa, and she's really poor. She's got a hole in her shoe, and the kids are all teasing her about it. And so I said, well, Alexandra, what did you do when they started teasing her? And she said, well, nothing. I said, well, the next time they tease her, I want you to say something. I said, well, what is it about her? I said, everybody's got something good about themselves. I said, what can she do that's good? I said, does she sing? Does she dance? And she says, well, actually, she can draw. I said, okay, the next time people start teasing her and harassing her, I want you to stand up and talk about what a great artist she is. And did you know that she could draw, blah, 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 blah? And so I said, I want you to do that, okay? And she said, yes, ma'am. 2 days later, she comes home, Mom, guess what? They started teasing Teresa again, and you know what? I told them that she could really draw, and guess what? They're giving her 25 cents now to draw them pictures. So the power of one small voice standing up is amazing. Okay, 3, go beyond the golden rule. All faiths say practice the golden rule. But in this society today, I think we've got to go beyond the golden rule. Some people talk about radical kindness now. You might have heard that. And there's some kind of a commercial on TV about a candy bar, and it talks about the difference between nice and kind. And it wasn't a good commercial because I don't remember the name of the candy bar. But what I got out of it was the difference between nice and kind. We have to stop being so nice. Some people say stop being politically correct. Stop being politically correct. But I don't think there's anything wrong with being politically correct because I interpret it as meaning having manners. But too many people go just be nice. They just say what the person wants to hear. And I can think of a few major people that do that. They just tell you what you want to hear just to make you feel that they're nice people and to make yourself look good. A kind person is one who will subjugate their own personal feelings, not worrying about whether I'm going to look good if I say this, but a kind person will reach out and extend an offer of help to someone without getting anything in return. So we need to go from being nice, to being kind, which is really offering some sympathy and empathy. Get your family and friends to become more vocal and active locally. All of you here, we're preaching to the choir. You're already involved, as evidenced by your presence here today. So you need to go out and talk to your friends and your co-workers and whatnot, and ask them to become more vocally involved in the PTA, in the NPU, the Neighborhood Planning Unit, in the voting, in elections, in local elections, the school board elections. A lot of people only vote once every 4 years. Really? Every 4 years for a president, and they feel, well, I've done my duty, I have voted. No. It's so much more important to vote that local election than it is to even make that national vote, because the local people that you elect are the ones who are going to develop the ordinances that are going to rule and control your life. And if you take care of business at home, or make them the people that you elect take care of business at home, hopefully it'll go up the ladder and rise to the top. Education is very important. We need as you said, we need to teach our children how to think critically. I heard on the radio somebody say today, there should be a treatment, racism maybe should be called a disease. And maybe there should be courses and classes that you have to go to, if you're found guilty of being a racist. Well, I don't know about that, but I'll just throw that out there. And the other thing, I mentioned before acting, when I mentioned my little daughter to act on what you believe in. It's so important that we just not think about what it is that should be done. Think about what I should do this or I should have done that. If you believe in something, you must act on it. and this is what Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, the best president Morehouse College ever had, Maynard's mentor, Martin Luther King's mentor, well, not his because he was he still? Okay, good. Dr. Benjamin E. Mays said, if you believe in something, you must act on it. If you don't act on it, it's not a belief. It's just an opinion. That's it for me.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you.
Well, I have several recommendations, and I tell you, they really, I think both Martin and also Valerie has kind of touched them. I'll just say this. I think the panel discussion that we're having today, right now, we need to have more of these. We need to be able to be introspective about who we are, and then seek to understand individual cultures as opposed to trying to understand, to be understood. I think we also need to really come back to a place of commonality. I had a conversation with the Lieutenant Governor. We were at lunch before I retired, talking about some specific areas that we were trying to work collectively together in law enforcement. And at the end of the meeting, he began to talk about him being a Republican, and he assumed that I was a Democrat. And the truth is, he was right. But the fact is, I said to him, and I quoted Maya Angelou, that we are more alike than we are unalike. And because we had talked throughout the lunch about education, about the need for finding better way for dealing with inner city youth that we're struggling with all around our country, and the desire to have a good life for our children. Those things are common ground. So I would say that we have to continue to find opportunities to understand each other, understand other cultures, work to be intentional around going to lunch with people that are not of your persuasion. Understand who they are, and then ultimately that one person can make a difference, as your third grade daughter did, by understanding the differences that you find within the community. And one last thing, if you are the only people that you know look like you, are in the same socioeconomic environment that you're in, then you need to step outside of that comfort zone that you find yourself in, if we're going to force ourselves to pursue Dr. King's vision of the beloved community.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you.
Could I have one dynamic, just
Yes.
one small dynamic?
Yes, sir.
Particularly for young people. I think it's important to understand, in our society, for those who are militaristically inclined, if you go through ROTC and then when you go to college and graduate, you graduate as a lieutenant in the military, which means that you're already leading. So if you can be a leader at 21 in the military, then why can't you run for school board? Why can't you run for city council? Most of those jobs are part-time. Why can't you run for state legislative office? In some cases, you can run for mayors. So I want to encourage young people to get engaged, not just by voting, which is most important, but to offer themselves for public service. It's one of the greatest things that you can do. One of our greatest mayors, by the way, was Maynard Jackson. And although it was confrontational what he did, he created opportunity for everyone. But Maynard Jackson was just loved. I mean, those many of us who, certainly in the African American community, he was like a god. I mean, honestly, the things that he did for this city that made this city a great city, talking about a city too busy to hate, but yet making sure that everyone could participate. And while he took a lot of heat, and this city did not treat him fairly, quite frankly, after his first 8 years in office, because the business community was angry because of what he did, but he really helped to make this city become an international city, and that's certainly one of the reasons why the airport is now named after Mayor Hodgeville and Mayor Jackson. And that's a small thing. It's a huge thing, but it's not enough. So I just want to encourage you, young people, to really look at what Maynard Jackson did many years ago, because there are opportunities in this city because he laid the foundation. He was unrelenting, not in a negative way. And he had a photographic memory. So I used to remember I introduced him to one of my friends at one time when I was on the Board of Commissioners. And 6 months later, we came back, and he remembered his name. I mean, Maynard was amazing.
And his job and his position.
Right. He was amazing. Anyway.
No, thank you.
I'm sorry, and I would like to throw one other little thing in here for you to think about. I interviewed a woman once, Dr. Patricia Williams, a political scientist. She's a professor now at Columbia. And she wrote a book called Open House, and it talked about her family. She's a black woman. Talked about basically her family, and at one point she talked about how some people in her family had passed for white, as happened in many black families. And so she was talking about those who had, several of her relatives who had passed for white. And so I said to her, well, let me ask you this. In your research, have there been cases where white people wanted to pass for colored? And she said, oh, more than you would imagine. And she said, as a matter of fact, if your family has been in this country for more than 2 generations, there's a 5 in 8 chance that you have black blood in you. And when you think about it that way, I think she might have said 5 in 7, but I'm going to give you a bigger spread. 5 in 8, okay? When you think about that, that means that if you look around this room, most of us are colored, for lack of a better word. And so if you think about it that way, where you really can't tell anymore who's really black and who's white. As a matter of fact, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson posits or theorizes that there is no such thing as a white race. That before y'all were white, those who call themselves white, you were Irish, or you were Italian, or you were German, or you were something else, but you didn't call yourself white. It was only after all the immigrants started coming into this country and couldn't talk the same language and didn't have the same culture that they had to find a common bond that they could unite around. And it became basically their skin color. And so that's when whiteness started to develop its so-called entitlements, because this allowed them to then discriminate against the Chinese and the blacks and the Jamaicans and the Puerto Ricans and whatever. So that's Dyson's theory. I'm not sure if I'm convinced of that, but the point is, whiteness is a man-made construct. Just like time, Albert Einstein. Time is a man-made construct. That's all I'm saying. If you're lucky.
Folks, I'd like to open it up to the audience now for questions. Who will lead off? Yes, sir.
My name is Austin Thomas. I go to the new school. So referring to what you're saying about, thank you very much. About open perspective communities. I've been raised in like a open perspective community all my life, where I have to talk to like Trump supporters, Hillary supporters, racists for whatever reason they choose to be so. But why do you think learning from other perspectives, is that crucial for youth development as like a high schooler, middle schooler, the younger generations before me? Do you think that is a good thing for younger kids to understand?
That's a great question, but I will tell you that going back to the first principle of the nonviolence, you have to understand, if you will, the individual that you're competing against or that you have a challenge with. If you don't understand their culture, don't understand who and where they're coming from, there's no way that you can get to a place of reconciliation. And so knowledge really tear down all of those kind of perceptions that you might have. And beginning to try to understand that individual is so critical. I think one of the things that we did in the Atlanta Police Department is really worked on that whole perspective. Information is so powerful. And if you don't know the challenges that you're facing about the individual, it's the art of war. You need to understand that individual before you can understand what goals and what principles you should put in place to be able to resolve a conflict.
What else, folks? Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Laban King. I have one question for you, Mr. King, and then I have one question for you two. Number one, when you look at Martin Luther King's legacy, for people who really haven't studied it, I mean, he's world-renowned. There's like about 3 or 4 quotes that you can pretty much go anywhere and people can recite from Martin Luther King. Do you think that in some way his legacy is not painted from an accurate picture? Because they really only talk about Martin Luther King from 1963 and before. So from 1963 to 1968, they don't really quote Martin Luther King, especially because at that point his legacy kind of changed from racial injustice to more so socioeconomic issues. So do you think that in some ways his legacy is not necessarily portrayed accurately? That's your question. Now, your question is this generation right now, I believe this is really the first time in which we, as the millennials and younger, have seen racism, but mostly it's institutional racism. So how can we fight institutional racism, because it's not as obvious as it was back in the days when you guys were growing up?
Thank you for the question, first of all. And I would have to say that I wouldn't blame anyone for how the legacy is viewed, other than all of us who are beneficiaries have a responsibility to inform. And you're exactly right. I think the revolutionary part of Martin Luther King was 65, 66, 67. And of course, people just think he was killed because he was trying to get, equal rights. It had nothing to do with that. It was a confluence of different things. But it probably was more so because he talked about a radical redistribution of wealth across our nation. And that means that, okay, you're going to take some of our money, and we're going to lose some money. Well, the reality is, his view was that there was real ability for opportunity for all. And, one of my personal frustrations is all of us live in a nation that has a $20+ trillion economy, and yet we have the audacity in our own city where we live to have poor people. That makes no sense. It is clear that we've not focused on that issue of how do we eradicate poverty. Dad and Mom talked about the eradication of the triple evils. Poverty, it was defined as poverty, racism, he said militarism, but I added violence, militarism and violence, because they're sort of related. And I think that even to this day, we still have to find ways to eradicate those triple evils. So on your question, yes, there has been an attempt just to talk about, even as it related to I Have a Dream. At the very beginning of the speech, this part is not highlighted much. Dad talked about a check that had been granted to communities of color, and the check came in marked insufficient funds. But he went on to say that I do not believe that there are insufficient funds to assist the plight of many who have been excluded. And, I still say that today. You may say, yeah, we got a tough economy. We really do. But $20 trillion? Something is wrong with our priorities. Because I'm not suggesting that everybody would have a mansion and be wealthy. That's certainly not the case. But everybody in America ought to have a decent home, even if it's 500 square feet, a decent home. Everyone ought to have the highest quality of education. Everyone ought to have health care. Everyone ought to have justice in this nation that we call home. And those were the kind of things that I think Dad fostered and promoted, and Mom fostered and promoted throughout her life. And we haven't gotten there yet. But with a few good women and men, that can happen.
Let me follow up on that vision statement, because I was a bit disturbed, I'll just say it that way. We were having a discussion around our dinner table with my oldest son and my oldest daughter, talking about these questions, by the way, Billy. And my son, he hesitated, and he said, well, you know, I really haven't been influenced by Dr. King's vision. My wife was really upset. But he went further into the discussion and began to talk about the plight of Black America, the neighborhoods that he worked in, the socioeconomic challenges that he see on a daily basis. And the truth is that he just was ill-informed about the vision. And so when it comes down to the question that you asked, whose failures are those? See, I think when Ms. Jackson read about the complex thought process that Dr. King espoused 50 years ago, we missed opportunities in our own families. And so now, my son of 35 years old are now trying to figure out a way, as opposed to starting from scratch, he should be moving on to the vision that was already cast decades earlier. Whose failures are those? We're both educated people, and we raised our children the best we knew how. In this homogeneous society that this young man talked about, he didn't see those challenges until he became an Atlanta police officer and started working in the area that your family was raised, and you see the plight, the blight, and also the socioeconomic challenges. It's not about racism, it's about economic challenges. And it comes down to education and giving people an opportunity to work their way out of the plight that they find themselves in. And so the vision is a challenge. Who failed in that? I think my generation has something to do with that failure in casting that vision.
Good point, good point. All right, my question, were you saying that was for me or was it for Mr. Peoples?
Well, really for you, for the second question, I wanted to know.
Yeah, the second question about
You talk about
racial institutionalized racism. Young man, if I knew the answer to that, we would all be happier and I'd be a lot richer. We just have to keep doing what we've been doing to fight institutional racism. We have to demonstrate, we have to protest, we have to run for office. Martin Luther King Jr., the third said that young people need to get involved in politics, and we're gonna have to change it from the inside. And basically it comes down to what Maynard would call the 3 Bs, and that his grandfather taught him. And basically it's reiterating what we've been talking about up here tonight. His 3 Bs were the book, the ballot, and the buck. The book is education, not just formal education, but informal social education, and today with social media, my gosh. So educate, not only yourself, but others, and we need to educate our people well, not just put a name on a building and call it a school. We've got to go in there and really do what a school is supposed to do. The education, the book, the ballot. Obviously, we talked about voting and how important that is, not just in the national elections, but even in, school elections and board meetings and so forth. And the buck, economic development, and that's one of the key ones. Once we get some economic power, in addition to the voting power, in addition to the education, those are the things that will be able to crack that wall of institutional racism. At least I hope so. And all I can say is Google Martin Luther King Jr., Google Maynard Jackson, and really kind of see the kind of thought that these men, they didn't just go out there and say, well, I'm just gonna do this just because. They had reasons, and most of them, the word servant leader was used earlier. That's what these men were, servant leaders. They weren't leading to be praised or to be famous or because of their egos. They were leading because they had something in their hearts that was forcing them to. Maynard once said to me, between his second term and the third term, when he had to come out when Andrew Young came in, as Andy was getting ready to leave office, Maynard came to me and said, Valerie, I've got to talk to you. And I'm like, oh boy, what is it? He said, now, keep in mind, he's the son of a minister, the grandson of a minister, the nephew of a minister. His whole family is full of ministers. And he said to me, Valerie, I have either got to go back into politics or I've got to go into the ministry. He said, I must help and serve the masses of people that need help. He said, it's either got to be the ministry or back into politics. He said, it's your decision. Whatever you decide is what I'll do. I thought to myself, what a chicken. I'm just kidding. I didn't say that. I was quite serious. What I did say to him was, I think you should run again. I think you should go back into politics. We've got a lot of great ministers and reverends out here in churches and everything. A lot of good, decent ministers. We don't have that many decent politicians, not to that degree. So I think you need to go, as a citizen, I want you to go back into politics. As your wife, and I'm saying, oh no, I can see that $500, not 500, but that 500% cut in salary. I should have said, no, that's when he said, I knew you really loved me when you let me give up that salary and go back into politics. But that is the kind of spirit that these men manifested, and it came from a heart and a character in service. Now, we can have education, intelligence, and all that is great, but if you don't have intelligence without character, then you don't have it.
Folks, what about one more question for our panelists this evening? Yes, ma'am.
There's a woman in the back there.
Yes.
Okay, so on this row, we're some of the CAP leaders at Lovett, which is the Teens Against Prejudice Club. And I was just wondering, like,
That's a question.
since we have this amazing panel, what is some of your advice as what we can do as students in our school? Just like with refugees.
I didn't hear the first part.
We have an organization here called TAP, Teens Against Prejudice.
Uh-huh.
She's one of the members of TAP, and she was asking what could they do here.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I would say is,
That's a good
I think the world is constantly changing, and we still have not accomplished the objective of diversity, sensitivity, and human relations. So it seems to me that that is something that experts come in and share perspectives on. And I think that, as I say, our world is getting smaller and smaller and more diverse. And yet, maybe at the national level, it doesn't seem like that right now. But that's a temporary set of circumstances because, the universe is moving forward. It's not moving backward. It may look temporarily like we are stalled and moving in a different direction. But I just believe somehow change is going to continue to manifest positively because there are many things that, just will not be able to be changed. We can try to put laws in place to change certain things. So I just think that we all need diversity, human relations, and sensitivity. And I think those three different perspectives, they have three different trainings that some experts can do in one or two sessions. But it may just be something to consider because it probably exposes us to things that we historically maybe have not been exposed to.
I think one other thing that you could perhaps do is just engage those differences that you find in the school. Go towards those individuals that don't look like you. Engage people in conversation. When there is injustice, even in the school, step up and step out in love. Give a good understanding about what the differences are. Seek to understand those differences so that you can have the perspective that you need to make good decisions. And it comes back to about being intentional and reaching outside of your norm. If the only people that you know and the only people that are in your circle look like you, think like you, dress like you, are in the same economic status as you, then you probably need to expand your circle.
The only thing I think I can add to that is to just remind your young people what I mentioned earlier, what I read from Martin Luther King about us being, by the time we leave the house in the morning, we're already beholden to half the world. And so if we think about that, and the only other thing that I might suggest is that we all, not just for students, that we all watch our language a little bit more. Words hurt. Words carry energy. Words can be very cruel sometimes. So and once again, some people always say, oh, you're just being politically right. No, you're not being politically correct. You're being kind, all right? And you have to learn what different words mean to the different communities. That's right. Law and order means something different to the person in Buckhead than it means from the person down in Bankhead. Law and order to the person in Bankhead means you got to watch out that you're not, profiled and that you're not, arrested for no reason. Law and order in Buckhead means, something, that maybe that you just you're not burglarized or something. But it's not like what another community might perceive from those same words. So be careful what you say and how you say it, please.
You had a question back here. Go ahead and ask it, and we'll have yours be the last question.
Hello, good afternoon. So my name is Emma Salinas, and I'm here on a visit from Honduras, right? This lovely piece of paradise in Central America. And I really love the part where you say that we need to go beyond the golden rule. I've always thought that with kindness, with this compassionate communication, we can go for that. But we can start working on that. How can we educate others to embrace that, to get to embrace the difference in culture, in race, right, in religion? How can we make that step on going beyond and educating others?
I just think we have to value each other, and that's really where it starts. If we believe that people are valuable, and I believe all God's children are created equal. I do believe that. And I'm not talking about black and white, I'm talking about all God's people. And if we begin to value where people are and what they bring to the table, then we don't separate them and discount what they have to say. But the only way you find that out is that you meet people right where they are and seek to understand where they are.
And I would just add, in a sense, kind of saying what the chief just said, that every culture has made a contribution to our nation and world. And unfortunately, sometimes we don't think about that, but we really need to look at, there's no culture that has not brought something. That's part of the reason why people come to our shores. And, that's part of the reason why we're engaged in blaming, well, it's the immigrants. People come here because there's opportunity, because this really is not a country that needs to become great. It's a great country, but it can become much greater.
And just my closing note would be, you mentioned the golden rule. How do you go beyond the golden rule? We go beyond the golden rule when we do unto others even if they don't do unto us what's right. And we go beyond by coming to a point of self-realization that if my neighbor is not safe, then I'm not safe. So basically, I can't be the best that I can be unless my neighbor is also being taken care of. And until we start thinking outside of just what's our own self-interest, what's going to benefit us, until we start thinking about the neighbor down in Bankhead, and wondering if the law and order down there is as good as it is up here. When we get beyond our own personal world and start thinking about the humanity as a whole, the human community, the man's community of man, you know, that's how we go beyond the golden rule, I think.
Friends, we have a wonderful reception up in our Galleria. There will be people out in the foyer of our Hendrick Chenault Theater to direct you upstairs, an incredible art exhibition that we would love to share with you, wonderful food, a chance to spend a little bit of time with our panelists. Please join me in thanking these folks for being with us tonight. And thank you all for being